Hello, hello, welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the Vacant Lot podcast. My name is Sylvie, and this is going to be a podcast about my ongoing love for the television series Hey Arnold. Just a little backstory. I've been watching the show Hey Arnold since it first premiered in 1996. At the time, I was 8 years old. It's now been 20 years later, and I am still as much of a fan as I'd been since the very first episode. I've been writing fan fiction, I've drawn fan art, I've paid for artists to draw commission-based artwork for me. I guess what you would call a obsessed super fan. If you're wondering why I decided to make the podcast, it's recently been announced that Hey Arnold, after being on almost a 10-year hiatus since the movie's premiere in 2003, it's coming back. There's going to be a two-parter television movie coming out in November of 2017. So I felt there's no time like the present to finally get into the podcasting sphere and say my piece on the show because I really love it. It's one of my favorite shows from my childhood. It still holds up today. I want you to consider this podcast as a love letter to the creators, to Craig Bartlett, to the voice cast, and also to the fans for making it such an enjoyable community to be in. I am aware that there already is a Hey Arnold podcast. I believe it's called Hey Arnold Hey, and it's run by Corey and Adam. And I definitely encourage you to subscribe to their podcast because it's a very insightful and in-depth look at all of the episodes of Hey Arnold. They give their review, they give their opinions of each episode, but also they get really, really deep into maybe the cultural significance or how it might allude to something more profound. It's hard to really describe. You'd have to subscribe and listen to their podcast, but it's really insightful. It's easy to catch up. They only update about once a month, so, sit down, listen for about a week or 2 weeks, and you'll be all caught up. For the inaugural podcast, I wanted to make a list of episodes that I think would be appropriate if you were trying to invite someone else to get into Hey Arnold, so to speak. Maybe you have a friend who's heard of the show but never watched it, and you wanted to introduce them to some of the best episodes to watch so that they can get hooked the same way you got hooked. We all know those moments where you're interested in a show and you decide to randomly pick that one episode, and you don't know that one episode might be a one-off. Maybe it's a theme-based episode that takes place during a holiday, or it's an episode that's totally out of the traditional convention of how the series goes. Sometimes that could disappoint the viewer because they're expecting one thing and they end up with something completely different, or they end up on an episode that totally turns them off the show and they don't decide to pursue it. So the purpose of this first episode is to list what I feel is the top 5 best episodes to show to a Hey Arnold newbie. I want to emphasize that I'm just a fan and this is just my opinion. You may not agree with the 5 episodes that I choose. If you do, great. If you don't, please don't crucify me. This is just my opinion. Okay, so let's start. First episode would be Downtown as Fruits. This is the first episode of the season 1, and it's a great introduction into the start of the series. Basic premise is Arnold, the main character, and his best friend Gerald. They have to go to a play written by one of their mean classmates, Helga. In the play, they're unfortunately forced to wear embarrassing food group costumes. In Arnold's case, he's dressed as a banana. In Gerald's case, he's dressed as a strawberry. So they're on their way to the play, and at the last minute decide not to go and end up downtown. They happen to stumble across some money and hilarity ensues. So this is a wonderful introduction, not only into the series, but as a way to set the pace for the rest of the series. Arnold properly introduced as a dreamer. We get to see the personality of his cool best friend Gerald. We get to see a little bit of Helga's little quirks and idiosyncrasies. We even get to see some of the other secondary characters. We have brief mention of Phoebe. You'll get to see the character Brainy, who shows up several times, much to Helga's chagrin. First appearance of the Peapod Kid, who ironically was named because of this episode, because he didn't have a name in episode 1 and he happened to be wearing a Peapod outfit, so he became Peapod Kid. Anyway, I don't want to spoil too much about the episode. It's really funny. It gives you a good basis for a lot of the characters that you'll learn to grow and love throughout the series. So definitely a good introduction episode. Next episode I'd like to recommend would be 24 Hours to Live, also known as the pilot. I say this because this was the episode that was shown prior to the theatrical release of Harriet the Spy in the 90s. There was a brief Hey Arnold short shown, which was later remade for the actual series and called 24 Hours to Live. It's essentially the same episode. It's just that the art style has improved, the animation's a little better, and the ending's been tweaked a little so it's not as anticlimactic as in the pilot. For obvious reasons, I chose this episode because this is a pilot. If the pilot didn't have that impact, then Nickelodeon would not have picked it up to become a series, and there'd be no Hey Arnold show, and I wouldn't be sitting here doing a podcast for you today. So it's the pilot. It's the episode that started it all, and it's another good introduction into, again, Arnold, Gerald, Helga. You even get to see a little more of another secondary character, Harold, and a little bit of the characters from Arnold's family, such as Grandpa. So again, 24 Hours to Live, also known as the pilot. The pilot version's a little harder to find. You may be able to find it on YouTube, but you can easily find in a DVD box set the episode 24 Hours to Live, and I'm pretty sure it's legally on YouTube as well if you want to check it out. The third episode I'd like to describe is Heat, and I'm kind of already going against what I said about picking an episode that properly establishes the characters, because this is kind of one of those quirky episodes where things are backwards. And how I mean to say is, the basic gimmick of this episode is it's so hot outside that all the characters are not acting in their normal way. This kind of backfires if you watch it as one of the earlier episodes, because I think it's only like the 5th or 6th episode shown when the series first aired. So you still don't have that proper foundation or proper basis of how all the characters are supposed to act. I think by episode 5 and 6, you already know how Arnold and Gerald and Helga are supposed to act. But there's a lot of characters that they introduce here that are almost like your first experience with the characters. So when you see them acting that way, you don't really appreciate the irony because you don't really know the characters yet. I guess the best example I can give is Arnold's grandmother is kind of a kooky bird. She's not all there in the head, I guess you could say, and you see this constantly throughout the series. In this episode, Arnold's grandmother is just Arnold's grandmother. She's concerned about the heat. She's concerned about keeping everyone cool and content. And you almost need that sort of narration by Arnold. It's like, this heat's gotten so bad, even grandma's acting normal, to establish like this is the irony of it. She's not normally like this. So yeah, you might be wondering, so why would you pick this episode if it's not indicative of how the characters normally act? Well, it's still a great episode. The art style's unique. There's some really interesting scenes, especially towards the end during the climax. Arnold and Gerald find an ice cream truck that has marked up its prices exorbitantly, where you'd have to pay $30 for an ice cream cone. So there's a funny scene where the kids are riled up enough that they decide to flip the ice cream truck. And it's definitely one of my favorite moments from one of the earlier episodes of Hey Arnold. I definitely suggest you check this one out. I was torn between suggesting this one or its companion piece episode, Snow, which is basically, instead of it being really hot, it's in the middle of winter and there's a whole bunch of snow, bringing upon a snow day for Arnold and his friends. But I think Heat's the more enjoyable episode of the two, and that's why I suggested. But if you wanted to watch the whole show, which contains both episodes could be considered a good introduction into the series. Okay, so next episode is Wheezing Ed. In Hey Arnold, there's a lot of episodes that focus around urban legends, and they usually have the same setup in every urban legend episode. There's a character who's not familiar with the legend. Gerald proceeds to explain the history surrounding the urban legend, And then Arnold and maybe Gerald and maybe some other characters go on to try to prove or dispel the urban legend. Sometimes the urban legend is true, sometimes it's a bit exaggerated, but they have a formula that works. I really enjoy the urban legend episodes. It was very difficult to decide which one I would suggest because there's a lot, especially in season 1, that are great. I decided upon Wheezing Ed because it's another episode that gives you a good look at all the different characters. I almost hesitate to call this an ensemble cast episode because you get a lot of characters interacting with Arnold and interacting with their environments. So basic premise of this episode, Arnold and the crew decide to go to an island in the middle of the city lake called Elk Island, wherein there exists the urban legend of Wheezing Ed. So they go there to snoop around. Meanwhile, there's also 2 bumbling criminals there making counterfeit pennies, which is kind of the side humorous subplot of the episode. Once again, we get a lot of different characters. It's a good introduction to Rhonda, who's the snobby rich girl, and Sid, who's the big-nosed kid with the green hat and white go-go boots. A lot of good scenes with Harold. Another excellent episode for Helga, because you get to see, well, what's her deal? She hates Arnold, but she also likes Arnold. What's up with that? So you get a little more of that in the episode. Another first season episode, as you could see, it seems to be a pattern with the list, but the first season episodes are just so good. They have a quality that none of the other seasons have. And you think in a lot of shows, the first season's kind of inferior and it takes a while to improve. And the show does improve. The art style in season 1 might not beat everyone's taste, but I've always been a huge fan of the colored pencil backdrops and kind of the simplistic style and animation. I'm going off track here. Anyway, this is a great urban legend episode, great first season episode, and an excellent introductory episode into the series. My final episode I want to discuss, as a side note again, I really grappled with narrowing this list down to 5 episodes because again, there were so many episodes and I was really tempted to pick an episode outside of season 1 because there's so many good episodes, and there are other episodes that you could probably argue are good introductions that are in either season 2 or season 3 or maybe even season 4. Ultimately, I decided to stick strictly with season 1. I know it's kind of predictable, but yes, all the episodes that I've listed are from season 1. And the final season 1 episode that I recommend is The Subway. Basic premise of The Subway: Arnold, Gerald, Helga, Phoebe, Harold, all the kids have just finished watching a movie and they miss the last bus to get back to their neighborhood, so they resort to taking the subway to get home. Subway breaks down and they're stranded in the subway car with a bunch of quirky characters, including a blind guy, a claustrophobic woman, a homeless bum that lives in the corner of the car, and things just get crazy because everyone's panicking about being stuck in the car. So I guess kind of another ensemble type episode. You get to see how all the different characters play off of one another. Also a little bit of humor, and it even ends in a song. So it's a cute episode with a nice little ending. It's very good. To be honest, you could probably pick most of the season 1 episodes. Just pick any random 5 episodes and you can't go wrong. They're all pretty good and they all give you a good introduction into the series. But if I had to pick point blank 5 episodes that I would pick to introduce someone to the show, these are the 5 I would pick. So this concludes the very first episode of the Vacant Lot podcast. I thank you so much for listening. I hope this will be a very engaging and very interesting discussion on a show that's more or less consumed my life for over 20 years. But if you're interested in following me throughout this podcast, you can subscribe to me on iTunes. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at Vacant Lot Show on Twitter, and I am Vacant Lot Podcast at gmail.com if you wish to email me. So this concludes episode 1. My name is Sylvie, and thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.